Hey folks, welcome back. It's Lucid, and this is going to be a video on pretender creation for the nation of Late Age Satis in both Dominions 5, where I've actually played a game, and then in Dominion 6, where I haven't. So what I want to do before we really get started into that is I want to share a correction, or really an omission from the previous video on the national overview. And that is, in that Dominion 6, Satis gets another feature which I think is very powerful. Maybe not in and of itself, but when added to everything else, which is you actually free spawn via your Dominion undead. And it's, if you recall from the previous video, you get like a pretty wide assortment. You get the hunched over lizards with tridents when you do reanimation. I'm pretty sure that's still the case. I haven't tested. We can test it in Dominion 6 here real quick. Just summon a bunch of our national long dead. We can just do this with reanimation. We'll see if we get the full mix. But yeah, we get the full mix. So via reanimation, you still get these guys, the trident dudes, which are really cool. But passively, without any of that, without having to cast or do anything, just having your candles, your Dominion in a province, you will free spawn long dead of a particular type. You get two varieties. You'll get these guys who basically don't have hats, but have otherwise armor and, a shield. You get these guys who have hats. Pretty solid troops. You will, on average, what I have found is get about your Dominion score in that province divided by 2 number of long dead a turn. So if you have 10 Dominion, you'll get about 5 or 6 long dead a turn. This is not only in places with forts, this is everywhere. So, if you're 10 provinces and you have 10 candles in them, you're going to be getting about 50 long dead a turn from that. So that's pretty good. That if you were to turn that into death gems, that's like 10 or something death gems a turn. It's significant. And you don't have to do anything. So it can definitely be the deciding factor. And like a war, it can be nice and counter raiding because you're going to have undead that are spawning wherever somebody's raiding. So if you just put a death mage there, because I don't think as part of your PD, oh, these guys have undead leadership 10. So yeah, as part of your PD, if you get it up, I think you start off with the base commander. Let's check real quick. Yeah, so your base PD commander actually has some undead leadership. So yeah, basically it's going to passively make you harder to raid because you'll be spawning undead every turn. And then these guys can support it. They're also holy too, so they can actually bless some sacred troops if you were to have them there as well. But yeah, so that's pretty significant. You're going to be getting a fair amount of long dead every turn just from existing. That's in addition to everything else. So that's the correction. We'll now jump into pretender design, which will be fun. Okay, and we are now back in Dominions 5, where we're going to talk about first our Dominions 5 pretender design, and then we'll go to Dominion 6, where we can talk about different Dominions 6 pretenders. Now, I'm going to unload on you here in this video some pretty interesting build ideas and mechanics that are not common knowledge in the Dominions community. I think really only me and a couple other people who I've talked to know about it. But it's possible with all these things that other people have figured it out already. We're going to be talking about some interesting things. One of the things is going to be this idea of a get repelled bless. And you've never heard of that before. You don't know what that is. But it's an idea where you want to be repelled. You're like, what? Yes. And it's a way Blood Vengeance interacts with Repel that's really interesting. And that's the build we're going to be taking. We'll talk more about that in a second. But let's review the nation real quick. So basically, you've got these guys who are pretty good. You've got these guys who are pretty good. And you've got these guys who are research monkeys. And these guys who are like chaff commanders, basically, to kind of bulk up your army if you're worried about like assassin spam or something. These are pretty good to put in. And then you've got pretty much garbage troops. Falchineer, I guess, is your best scales troop. And then these guys are maybe okay for sacreds. Point is that it's a nation that's going to struggle in the early game, but as we discussed in the national overview, based on primarily life after death conversion of your priests into undead priests, you can have possibly the best scaling in the game. So the question is, how do we turn this into a viable nation? We basically got a nation whose power curve is like kind of weak early, just the nation itself, right? That it's kind of weak early, but then it's really strong later. So you need to find a way to balance out the early part. And this creates basically a requirement list, I think, for the pretender. I think if you play scales, you'll probably lose the game most of the time. Because I mean, you can outplay people with scales and do things, but you just don't have a lot going for you. Trying to win, survive, or whatever is a scales late age Satis. I think what you want to do, what you'll have a better chance of doing, is have a crazy god that's going to keep you alive. And so the requirements for the god is that it needs to be thick. It needs to be able to kill armies. Ideally, we can put so basically that's going to be titans, right? We basically are going to want a titan. The problem is we're also going to want a good bless for our tomb worms. Now, you could have a cool god that's going to keep you alive, and instead of making tomb worms, you make chariots. And the chariots are really good. The problem is later in the game, the chariots can be attacked via their magic resistance, which isn't that great. They can be wiped with a bunch of battlefield wipes. The chariots will kind of fall off a bit more. So the tomb worms are a bit more durable. They give you a lot better scaling. But you could, for example, just take Blood Vengeance, right? So get some god with blood. I think of all the titans Satis has, I think the Mother of Monsters is the only one with blood. So you could pick her and get Blood Vengeance. And Blood Vengeance is going to add basically battlefield-wide clear protection. In other words, you could just have 100 tomb worms in an army and 1,000 tomb chariots. And if they try to use battlefield wipes, it'll trigger the Blood Vengeance on the tomb worms and maybe, kill the caster. So it makes the tomb chariots better just by virtue of having the tomb worms present with Blood Vengeance. So that's a really nice thing to have in your bless. Like you could put Blood Vengeance in it just for that. Not because you're going to make most of your undead priest production go into tomb worms, but just because you want the tomb worms to protect the tomb chariots. Okay? So that's an idea. But the requirements for the god aren't just that, right? So I think basically, I guess what I'm saying is you have two ways to go. You could go like a light bless, which is just Blood Vengeance, and lean into tomb worms. I mean, into tomb chariots, right? So you're going to put very little else into your bless. But to really survive, to really thrive in a first war, you're going to need to be able to kill armies with your Mother of Monsters. And her just walking around the map is not going to be a very reliable way to do that. So what you could do is you can pick up air or astral. And if you do that, then you're going to be able to magic base. You can now cloud trapeze. Or teleport. So I think you would want to do either one. Air is nice because air is a really valuable path, especially if you get all the way up to 4. Astral is nice because it enables you to pick up some things which synergize very well with Blood Vengeance, like Arcane Finesse synergizes really well because it's going to make Blood Vengeance proc more. I think that works. And then, it's also nice to have high astral because you can now cast things. There's other things which are nice in astral, like Fate Weaving is very good because it synergizes with Blood Vengeance, and that a unit that has Fate Weaving on it will take more damage from Blood Vengeance. The way Blood Vengeance works, for those of you who don't know, is at a high level, if you get attacked and you take damage, the enemy will take damage too. But it doesn't take the equal amount of damage. Let's say you take 5 damage. Does the enemy get 5 damage for Blood Vengeance? No. It starts with a base damage roll of 5 armor negating damage. And then you, as the person returning Blood Vengeance to them, will add to the 5. So you'll get a dice roll that adds to the 5. And they'll get a protection score of 0 because it's armor negating damage. But then they'll get a dice roll on their side of the equation too. So it will be however much damage you took, let's say 5 damage, plus a dice roll on your side, versus 0 plus a dice roll on their side. If they have Fate Weaving applied to them, that dice roll on their side will go away. Or I forget what gets cut in half or whatever it is. It gets reduced. We can look up the mechanics on the wiki, but basically that dice that protects them. Oh, if they have Fate Weaving, they have the plus dice, but they also get a minus dice. So for them, if they have Fate Weaving applied, instead of being, 5 plus, Blood Vengeance dice roll minus or equal or versus 0 plus the protection dice roll, it would be, the 5 plus Blood Vengeance dice roll versus 0 plus a protection dice roll, but minus a Fate Weaving dice roll. And it can't go negative. It would cap at 0. But you have a pretty good chance of getting rid of a lot of the protection dice roll. So long story short is Fate Weaving will allow you to proc more damage on Blood Vengeance. So there's some synergy there. There's synergies in other things too. There's a lot of synergies in the build we're going to end up using. But before we get into all of those, these deep mechanical synergies that you didn't know about, I want to talk about other things that would be nice to have. Other things would be nice to have. Unaging is really nice. It's going to make our Sarumancers not die of old age, which is pretty cool. It's going to make them like have significantly better attack and defense. I think in game this is normally -2, and I think it jumps up to like, we'll get rid of that. I think it goes to 0 or 1. So you're basically going to be getting 2 attack and defense on the Sarumancers, which is nice for like even stuff like Earthquake, and then obviously good if they're in melee. It's also nice versus like Wind of Death, which is pretty common in late age because there's a pretty good amount of air death cross path. So Unaging is a pretty nice pickup. It's nice to have though. It's not something you must have. Arcane Finesse is nice. Fate Weaving is nice. These are all nice things. Larger would be nice if we could afford it, because it's going to make our worms bigger and beefier. They're going to be less targetable by dense things, but they're also going to be less good at killing. Like, you're going to have a less dense front line, but that might be okay. Especially if you're supporting it with like additional undead, long dead chaff. So Fate Weaving, pretty good. Larger, pretty good. Larger is also especially good on your mages. It's going to make them a lot less susceptible to remotes, like to nukes, because they're going to have more hit points. It's also going to help with like Soul Vortex and stuff. Anything that you have that's going to add to the base HP is going to allow them to like Soul Vortex up to higher levels. So they'll be much better as like thugs, which was one of the use cases we were talking about. So larger is nice, but it's again a luxury. And if you're playing a build where you're planning on rolling around like 30 Sarumancers in a stack, then this will be a bigger deal because that's a lot more juicy of a target for something like Murdering Winter or Flames from the Sky. If you're doing smaller squads where there's only like 10 Sarumancers or something, it's not really a great target. Anyway, this is an optional part of the build. And then the other thing that's really nice on Tomb Worms is, of course, Reforming Flesh. And this is regen for Tomb Worms. Now, importantly, regeneration, which is another option you could take, will not work on Tomb Worms because they're inanimate. Nor will the spell Mass Regeneration work on them. So if you want them to regenerate in combat, you have to take Reforming Flesh as part of your bless. This also is going to be very nice, not on Sarumancer thugs, but on white form Sarumancer thugs. Right? So if you turn these guys into a white mage, they're holy, they benefit from Reforming Flesh. It's pretty nice to add in there. And you can now start imagining how these guys as white mages will actually be pretty strong thugs. They can be regenerating, they have Phoenix Pyre, they have Soul Vortex, and you put a bunch of gear on them, you can fluff them with Earth and Astral. They can be pretty tough. And then you get rid of the aging penalty, their encumbrance is going to go down. They can be pretty solid. Though, also for white mages, the unaging doesn't really matter. So these are kind of a suite of things that would be nice in terms of the bless. In terms of the Pretender, though, I think Mother of Monsters is kind of the clear winner among all the ones, because I think Blood Vengeance is really important. There's another synergy with Blood Vengeance we haven't really talked about, which we'll talk about in a moment. But you could, in theory, pick up any of these. But, I mean, you could even pick up, like, this guy is kind of a traditional late-age Satis build. You know, a lot of times you'll see this guy with, like, hard skin reforming flesh or something is one of the builds that's really common. Hard skin also is another thing that would be great. It's going to take your Tomb Worms up to... they come with 10 built-in protection, but that'll take them up to 15. So hard skin makes them a lot better. And this is one of the things that will really pay off in the early game. So hard skin is definitely something to consider. So, you know, if you want to do hard skin reforming flesh, Devourer of Souls could be your guy. The problem, again, you need to, I think Magic Phase in Dominions 5, where we're really putting the entire weight of the nation on our god for early survival, is how I see it. You must be able to Magic Phase, right? So this guy would need to be air or astral empowered. And new magic paths are extremely expensive on him, 20 more than on her. But if you're only picking up one, it could be fine. Like you could do, I'll just show you a build we could do with this guy that would be fine. Right, we're not going to have Blood Vengeance with this build. But, you know, you could have hard skin and reforming flesh. And then you're not going to want to get high astral because it's expensive. But, you know, you could pick up this and maybe you go all the way up to 4 so you actually have decent access. And you could pick up like, you know, something like that. So like this could be a build you could do, and this would be easy to pay for. This is reasonably cheap. When you look at the scales we're about to take on the build I'm actually proposing, this is very cheap. But this is something you could do, okay? Yeah. The requirements for the build are you basically need somebody which can super combatant armies. This guy can, but you know, it doesn't have all the arm slot, like the gear slots. So it's going to be a weaker super combatant than a mother of monsters, but it technically could check the box. Somebody that can magic phase is going to give you parts of your bless that, like for this though, you really are going to be leaning almost exclusively into Tomb Worms because you don't have Blood Vengeance, your Tomb Worms aren't able to protect other kinds of long dead you have, or even your mages, right? So just having the Tomb Worms on the field are actually going to help protect mages from battlefield wipes too, if they have Blood Vengeance. So with a build like this, you know, you're just like, hey, we're going to have Tomb Worms be good fighters. They're going to be really thick with hard skin and reforming flesh and shock resistance, and they're going to go kill stuff. So yeah, that's a way to do it. The particular build we're going to take though is... this is going to be a very deep in the paint build. So go ahead and get ready. Let's just preemptively do what we need to do here. We all know what's going to happen. Okay. This is the start. I think I had probably about that many. I don't remember the build exactly, but it was something like this. All right. Blood Vengeance, Unaging, Reforming Flesh, Fate Weaving. Wait, do I have stuff left over? Oh wait, I picked up something else. What did we get? Did we get fire shock resistance? I don't think we got that. What did we get? Because I actually have design points left over. I wasn't expecting this. It's Awake too. Let's actually see what our build was. We went with I was playing on an alt, so I went with a stealthy undercover name that will not be easily detected. It's not my normal, very fancy name. So, oh no, we took magic scales. Right, that was the one scale we didn't dump. So that's why we, you know, but that was the build. So it's Fate Weaving, it's Dominion 4, dumped every scale. Obviously we had to go heat, so we didn't fully dump temperature, because you can't really place a Tis in the cold. Not in Dominions anyway. I took Death, took Misfortune 3, and took Magic 2. Now the reason for Magic 2 is pretty important. If you go Drain, your Blood Vengeance, if you're fighting in your Dominion, like if you're defending yourself, your Blood Vengeance is going to basically get a 2 penalty compared to Magic 2. Right, so enemies fighting in Magic 2 are going to have -1 MR, versus they're fighting in Drain 2, they'll have +1 MR. So it's a 2-point swing. And that's going to be a pretty significant change in the output of damage of Blood Vengeance. So yeah, that was what we did. And then Fate Weaving is going to synergize with Blood Vengeance. Fate Weaving also is going to synergize with Poison Cloud. Stuff that gets Fate Weaving applied to it and has to sit in Poison Cloud like evaporates. I mean, Poison Cloud's strong anyway, but Fate Weaving really does kick it up another notch. Another thing Fate Weaving synergizes with is a very low 1 armor negating damage spell. Think of it. It's Soul Vortex. So Soul Vortex does 1 armor negating, MR negates damage. Soul Vortex is going to benefit from Magic 2 because things are going to have less MR. So yeah, we're going to be Soul Vortexing things that don't have much MR with Fate Weaving applied to them. Fate Weaving is going to make them take extra damage, and it's going to make us heal extra damage from Soul Vortex. So basically our thugs, which are going to be like Soul Vortex, recruit out of any fort thugs, potentially later with Phoenix Pyre and stuff on them, are going to be benefiting. It's going to be like super Soul Vortex because they'll have Fate Weaving applied. And then, you know, for the undead ones, they'll be using Reforming Flesh and, you know. Anyway, this ends up playing out differently in the game because what I run into is I end up having not enough Sauromancers for all the Tomb Worm armies I want to support. Okay, so the ideas I had of doing all this thugging, I think they were good ideas, and I was prepared to do it. But by the time I actually really started mobilizing my Mage Corps, I had a lot of, like, it made a lot more sense to use Sarumancers supporting armies or small armies than it did to have them doing thug duties where they'd get afflicted and stuff on their own. So a little bit of theory versus reality there. And like in theory, I was imagining all these Sarumancer thugs, which are going to take a lot of gems worth of gear and all these things. In reality, I would just move out Tomb Worms supported by a few mages and priests. And that ended up being effective, and I didn't have to risk as many gems. So, but yeah, this is the build I ended up going with. And I think there's really nothing about this build I think I would change. Fate Weaving also is going to get rid of luck, which is really nice in the deep late game, because luck is the only way, really, to counter Banefire. Things like that, right? So you put luck on, that's the only way to really resist the otherwise basically lethal damage of Banefire. So Fate Weaving will help get rid of that, which is kind of cool. It's also going to make things better. Like Rigor Mortis is going to interact with Fate Weaving, not from the caster, but if I have a front line of worms that are all in contact with the enemy and they have Fate Weaving applied on them, they will take increased damage from Rigor Mortis. So you can start to see how things are going to start stacking up. We can cast fire resistance on our worms, right? And then we can do heat from hell. And then there are people that, if they don't have fire resistance and they're in contact, they're going to take increased damage via Fate Weaving. There's a lot of things where Fate Weaving actually is pretty good. So yeah, there's a lot we can do. In the late game, we can do Soul Drain with her. She can cast Wish. She can cast Arcane Nexus. She can cast Tarts. There's a lot. It's a very powerful mage. Can do really high blood magic, blood hunts very well. But yeah, having her fully kitted, especially if you're like trading for gear with people who are going construction, you can have good gear very early. And she's immune to magic duel basically at 7. Like Astral 1s can't touch her. Astral 2s, I think if they roll a 6 and you roll a 1, because those are the max and min, an Astral 2 will jump up to 9 and you roll a 1. I'm sorry, Astral 2 will jump up to 8 and you roll a 1, you jump up to 8. So the best an Astral 2 can do is you both die. And that's in the very small chances that you roll a 1 and they roll a 6. So you're mostly immune from 2s. So yeah, basically magic duel immune. You can actually, I mean, she's low enough that you could, if you wanted to, if there's a bunch of Astral 1s, you could have her magic duel people, right? You could just magic duel all the Astral 1s and she has no chance of dying. So 7 is kind of like an important breakpoint for magic duel vulnerability. Though there's other magic duel kind of counterplay in 6. And then, yeah. So yeah, she can do Soul Vortex. She can do Personal Regen. She can do Enlarge. Oh, she can't do Enlarge because she's already max size. Later in the game, she can do Damage Reversal too. Like, she's a top-end super combatant. To fight her, imagine you fight me and you know I'm going to have this god and I'm going to try to jump on her either in conjunction with my army, like move her with my army, or just jump on you and try to kill you. First of all, you have no idea what gear I'm going to put on. You don't really know my research. I could also have Body Ethereal, which is really good in the late age because there's not a ton of magic weapons in late age compared to other ages. Of course, depending on who you're fighting. So yeah, she's going to come in Body Ethereal if she needs it. Personal Regen. Maybe we're already at the point because you can research pretty fast if you want to with Satis to be at Soul Vortex. But she's got Blood Vengeance applied because she's jumping on you in friendly Dominion, potentially. Like, your thugs, you're not going to be able to kill a regenning Mother of Monster with, like, Great Swords of Sharpness thugs or something, because she's also going to probably have, like, 25 protection. You know, she's going to be very resistant to those because, okay, maybe they get a couple hits off, but more than likely, unless you've stacked MR, they're going to die. And so now your thugs are having to get really expensive because you're having to stack MR. Then you've got to sit in a Fear Aura, which is going to be boosted up by death. So your Fear Aura, you know, is going to be, you've got to deal with that. You've got to deal with Poison Cloud, right? But then she's also not just like a monster. She's got gear. So you're going to have, you know, whatever weapons you put on that are going to be killing people that way. You're going to have Astral Shield, most likely, which is going to be paralyzing people next to you. There's just a lot of threat vectors. She is, I think, a very top end, very, very top end, especially once you pay the very expensive price. It's a lot cheaper if you're going to do this on a budget to do air. You don't have to worry about going quite as high for Magic Tool. So you could just do like Air 2 or something. But if you, either way, once you give her Magic Phase, she is, I think, a premier Titan for smashing early mid-game armies. And yeah, so in the early mid game, you're basically relying on her to destroy 1 or 2 enemy armies, and then for your armies to just mop up what's left, right? And you'll be making your sacreds, you'll be making the free spawn temple sacred serpents, and your death gems are going to be going into Tomb Kings in Dominions 5. So this is the build that I used in Dominions 5. I think it's extremely strong. The issue that you'll have is when you play, if you play Satis and Dominions 5 after this video comes out, presumably people will know that this is a scary nation, and you're going to have a lot more pressure on you early than I probably did, because, you know, people think Satis sucks, and I realized it actually isn't that bad. So, yeah, but still, this I think is the best hope you have in Dominions 5 of surviving early mid-game in good shape, is putting all your stuff into a god. Now, that doesn't mean this is the only build. Doesn't even mean it's the best build. This is just my appreciation of what I think the best build is for Satis and Dominions 5. And I spent a ton of time coming up with this. The other interaction, and we've talked about so many interactions and synergies, and I haven't even told you the main one yet. The other interaction, and this is very, very cool, is there's an interaction between Blood Vengeance and Repel. And so the way your repel check works is that when you swing a sword and you attack somebody, if that person has a longer weapon than you, they have a chance to repel you, right? So, you know, if this guy has a spear and you're attacking somebody with a spear and you have a dagger, you're going to get a repel check. It's an attack versus defense. If you have low defense and they have high attack, that repel check will succeed kind of the first wicket, right? It also has to do with weapon length. But yeah, that'll pass the first wicket. Then it's like, okay, if they have higher attack than you have defense after the dice roll and stuff, you've been repelled, but you have a chance as the attacker to override the repel. So it's like, okay, I've been repelled, but this is like if you're a berserker, you have really high morale, you don't care that you got repelled. So you're going to take some damage, but you're going to attack anyway, despite the fact that you were repelled. So these are some of the interesting, like, deep mechanical things that you might not even know about Dominions that have been happening, always have been happening in the background. And that's just the baseline of how the repel system works. So it's interesting, you know, how the stats all work there. But importantly, if you get repelled and you pass the morale check to go through it, you will take damage. The way that damage roll works is somebody attacks you with their normal attack. So like, let's say this guy was repelling the slinger, right? He's going to attack with the 13 damage attack. I don't think attack and defense factor in. It's just the damage value and the protection value versus the slinger's protection value of 5. And it will do a full damage roll. And if there is any damage, so if that number is greater than 0, if the slinger who was doing the attack with the dagger and is getting repelled, if he had like 30 protection and the guy was only doing 13 damage, it's likely he would, if he pushed through, if he passed the morale check to continue attacking through repel, it's likely that he wouldn't take any damage from the repel as he pushed through, because the repel attack would just kind of glance off his really good armor. So he would pass the morale check, he would push through the repel, he would attack, he wouldn't take any damage. However, he only has 5 protection in this case. So if he's attacking, getting repelled, he's likely going to take damage from a 13 damage spear. That will get capped to 1. So the way repel works is you're going to take a normal damage roll. That damage roll will then get capped to 1, and that's how much damage. So he would attack, if he passed the morale check, he would push through the repel and attack. He would take 1 damage. And by the way, this doesn't use up this guy's attack. Like, this guy can still do a normal attack that round in combat. It's a separate thing. But the slinger would push through the attack. He would take 1 damage, so he'd go from 11 hit points to 10, and then he would execute his dagger attack against the spearman. Now, how does this interact with Blood Vengeance? If you get repelled, right? So if you have low defense and you get repelled, and you have a shorter weapon than they do, so you get repelled, and you pass the morale check, then you will attack anyway, even though you got repelled. So if you're high morale, but then have a short weapon with poor defense, that's okay, right? Because you'll just plan on taking some damage when you get repelled. And so, you know, that happens. But if you have Blood Vengeance, when you take that damage, so if you also don't want too much protection. If you have too much protection, you won't be taking damage very often. But if you have not very high protection, you'll actually take damage pretty regularly when you get repelled. And when you take that damage, when you get repelled, it's going to be capped to 1, right? But then you are going to reflect that damage back as Blood Vengeance, because it's just Blood Vengeance procs anytime there's damage. That's how that works. So you reflect the repel damage back via Blood Vengeance. But if you recall, for our build, we don't even have normal Blood Vengeance, right? We have Fate Weaving boosted Blood Vengeance, right? We have like this really cool combo. And what this is going to mean is that we will take 1 damage, right, from when we get repelled, but the enemy is going to take that 1 damage, plus we're going to get a dice roll on our side. So it's going to be on this side of the equation, it's 1 plus dice roll, DRN, it's an open-ended dice roll, versus, and then on this side of the equation, it's going to be 0, because they get no protection against it, and then they get plus a DRN, but then because Fate Weaving, minus a DRN. So in effect, it's going to be 1 plus, basically we're going to get, it's not quite this way, but you can think of it like we're going to be doing almost 1 plus DRN more damage than they are. It's going to be less than that, just because of how the math works. But on average, I think it's about like 4 damage. When you do all the math and add up, it's like 3 or 4 damage. Somebody can actually do it. I haven't actually crunched it, but I think I've roughly mathed it out. So yeah, what does that mean? It means when you attack, so let's look at Tomb Worms now. So if we look at a Tomb Worm, if we look at a Tomb Worm, these guys are the perfect chassis for a get repelled build. They have enough protection they don't die that easily, but not so much that they'll block the damage that's coming in from the actual damage part of the repel check, right? They have super low defense, and they have a linked 0 weapon. So they're always, basically every single shot, they're going to be failing the first part of the repel check, which means a repel will happen. They then have perfect morale, basically. Not truly. They may fail this roll, but in practice, they very rarely will, right? So almost always then push through the second portion of their roll, which means basically every time a Tomb Worm attacks, unless it's also fighting something with a linked 0 weapon, which is pretty rare, it will get repelled, and then it will trigger this. It will take 1 damage, but you have a boatload of hit points, so you don't really care. You'll take 1 damage, and then the enemy, because they did 1 damage to you, will have to roll a Blood Vengeance check with the math stacked against them. So basically, every time you proc an attack, you are going to get bonus damage added to your attack from Blood Vengeance because of repel. Let that sink in for a second. Right, so that's a really complicated interaction. You have to understand a lot of mechanics to figure this out. And it's really strong. Because now, think of all the synergies, right? We've got the synergy with Fate Weaving and like all the battlefield spells, but also with things like Soul Vortex. We've got the synergy between Fate Weaving and Blood Vengeance. And then we've got the additional thing that synergizes with both of those, which is this Get Repelled build, which nobody knew about. And we have here invented. So also shout out to Zan, who helped invent this with me. So yeah, Commander Xander coming in clutch here. So yeah, this is the Get Repelled build. It's in all of its pure glory. Like this is absolute hell bless. We have destroyed all of our scales and we're leaning into this 100% with this build. And it's disgusting. It's really good. So these guys basically get significant bonus armor negating, but it's MR negates damage via this Get Repelled build via Blood Vengeance added to each attack. Thing would be really cool is if you could like take quickness in your bless as part of it. Sadly, that doesn't factor in, but like quickness Blood Vengeance is also really good if you have a Get Repelled chassis because of this mechanic. But yeah, anyway, so this is the Tomb Worm. Very, very good. Very good with this build. I think we basically covered the Pretender design. This is the god. She's really, really strong. Really strong. She can also turn into a white mage herself, like a white titan. Though I believe because she's female, I think she turns into the size 5 titan, which I don't love. But this will be different in 6 too. And in 6 also, you can't twice born your gods. There's a bunch of changes. I'll have a whole video, I think, on all the transformation shenanigans and changes in Dominion 6, because those are important. We'll talk about all the Lich chassis, because that's a new thing. But also, your god just is polymorph immune. She can't change into anything. He or she. So that's out. So the idea of like transforming your Rainbow Mage and then twice borning them to get an Undead Titan, those days are over. But, you know, Mother of Monsters, thick as hell. I never ended up twice borning her in my game, even though I could. I mean, I did twice born her, but I never converted her. The nice thing about converting her is that you benefit from reforming flesh on the chassis, which you wouldn't have before. The downside of converting her is you lose Poison Cloud, which kind of sucks. But yeah, she's thick as hell. So that's the build. Let's look at how we might do that in Dominion 6 now. I'm going to pull up Dominion 6. Okay, so I've got Dominion 6 pulled up now. Now, what are the changes for Dominion 6, right? We have better scales troops. We have this crossbowman who's good. We have the falchineer who gets better armor. And we get the halberdier who can punch through the thick armor that other people are going to have, and also not have to worry about repel, if that's a big thing, versus whoever you're fighting. And then in conjunction, they get things which are still pretty useful, like slingers, which are always nice. And then they get this guy, which might be very rarely useful, but like in special cases for certain types of thugs or things like that. Yeah, and then they get this, so the scaling is going to start way sooner, right? So like for your first war, if your first war is on turn 15 or 16, this guy could potentially make a lot of Tomb Worms even by then, if you've been nothing but making these guys out of your cap. So the scaling can start way sooner. What does that mean? For the Pretender, it means you have a lot of flexibility now. You don't have to do like a magic phase capable Pretender. Like you could just, if you want to, you could just take Mother of Monsters. We can forget about Astral, right? And we can have her dormant and we can take pretty good scales, right? And she can just be, you know, she'll wake up. So the Bless will be online for our first war. We can go Blood Vengeance here. We can go Unaging. And we can do Reforming Flesh. If I pay for it. Some of these things you have to get one of the changes in Dominion 6 is you actually have to, if there's a requirement for magic, you can't actually select Unaging until you've taken that requirement. So anyway, you can see we have a lot of, we have one bless point left, so I can sack one of these. We'll pull nature down. So you could do this, right? Way cheaper. Because before we were having to torch all our scales, right? Here, we don't really have to. I think we'll leave Death torched. We'll probably leave Luck torched. But we can now, for these, actually have pretty nice scales. You probably want some of your cap-only Sacreds, too. But yeah, I mean, like a build like this, maybe you go 4. Or we can... Yeah, like this is probably decent production. Oh, we go to 3 here too, so we can go to 1. Yeah, I mean, this is not a horrible... And I'm not sure what the scale balance is here. I haven't tested this. I would a lot of times. If I was going into a multiplayer game, I would see really what the right balance of these is for getting out early troop production. I'm imagining if you're making crossbowmen, which are more even in terms of resource and recruitment points, you might even those scales out more. But if you're leaning more into the falchineers or into these guys... Well, these are pretty even in terms of resources, but the falchineers specifically are a good bit more resources than recruitment points. So this build where you're leaning more into productivity is going to be helpful earlier in the expansion where you're almost always resource constrained. So it's going to help with that, but it's also going to help later a bit more with falchineer production. But if you want to do more crossbows, like maybe you go a little closer to even. But these are okay scales, which you could do scales expansion with. Yeah. You could, if you want to, also dump magic, but I do think for all the reasons I outlined previously, magic actually is something you probably do want. So yeah, that's, you could just do something like this straight up, which would be pretty easy. You're going to have better scales to expand with, which would be nice if you do this build, but by being dormant, you won't have your god to expand. And as we'll show in the Dominions 5 playthrough, which I think I'll put at least some of up, I'll probably at least show you guys expansion and some of the late wars and things like that. But yeah, you were relying a lot on your god, not only for winning your first war, but also for expanding. And she's a beast at expanding, especially once you pick up Enchantment 2 for personal regen. But yeah, she's pretty good at expanding. In this case, if you go dormant, you won't be able to take it. But there's a bunch of other things you could play. Right? Like you could pick up, like just do a fountain, and you could just do like full scales and do Blood Vengeance. Like this. And the idea of this build is basically, let's crank our Dominion up high so we get a fair amount of free spawn. Maybe this, and that way you'll be 10 with once you get a set of forts built. And you go imprisoned, and you just have max scales that you can afford anyway. Oh god, we still have more. We go up to Dominion 10. Pick up something else in our bless. I think this can teleport. Not sure if you'd want to. Probably Reforming Flesh would be the next thing you'd pick up. Maybe do you do the Demi-Lich? This guy gives magic, and Demi-Lich gives death. But that's not going to stack with the death we already get. I mean, yeah, I don't know. This is probably better. But, yeah, I mean, anyway, there's a ton of different builds you can do. We'll just see what Reforming Flesh is going to cost here. Go to Heat 3. Go down to Dom 8. Go down to Neutral. I think you still want to be this 2, or Magic 2. Yeah, I don't know. It's not actually that much better. I think I would much prefer... I mean, maybe you could just take... I mean, you could also take Mother of Monsters Imprisoned and just have a better bless. Whoops, why am I doing this? We'll do 4, 8... Unaging. So yeah, something like this, but now we're imprisoned, so we get 200 more design points. So we're not taking death anymore like we were. That's one of the things. Yeah, I don't know. I think with this, I think this nation scales well enough. You can really just take death, and then you could just have like better. We could take misfortune too. And just have, oh, well, I guess this is the best we can do. Would you rather have misfortune or death? I think I would rather have growth. I don't know. You do something like this and have like even better scales. I personally would rather have my God Awake earlier. There's a lot of things that come, like even if you're not using her to fight, because without Magic Phase, she kind of is going to suck at fighting. You can just have her Blood Hunt and break into vampires nice and early. So that's a kind of cool thing you can do as well. But yeah. This is, you can basically do a very similar build. And if we want to look at the actual blesses that you could get, Unbearable Splendor would be worth considering on the worms. I don't think this is maybe the best thing for like truly, because people are going to, verse worms, people might want to put up Solar Brilliance anyways. So I don't think this is the best bless. Righteous Wrath is kind of cool. If any sacred unit is killed, people in range will get attack, strength, and morale. So it's pretty cool. I don't think it stacks. I haven't tested it, but that would be a good thing to check. It's certainly a cheapish way to get +3 strength and +3 attack. And that will certainly be, it's more relevant on things where you don't care about a sacred dying. And that's certainly a box we check. You could potentially have flying worms. That would be hilarious. That would not be something anybody would expect, but could be really strong. Yeah, I'm not sure if any of those are good. Quickness, like I mentioned, is amazing. You don't have encumbrance, so you miss one of the major downsides of quickness. It would be really good. And then, what else? Hardskin, I mentioned, is really good. Fate Weaving, Etherealness. These things haven't really changed. Magic Weapons is more expensive and is Incarnate now. So that is a thing. Fear is also something you could definitely consider, because you're going to have tremendous numbers of these guys. And we talked about fear stacking in the last video. And I think that's a very serious thing to consider. It's just because fear is also nice because you could just have like a front line of these guys backed up by like hordes of undead. And just having stacked fear is going to be so hard for enemy melee stuff to resist. But I mean, you could just do like full scales Lich like this. And I mean, you could be awake full scales Lich and have like almost have very good scales, you know? So, I mean, this is the thing you could do. And this actually would be great on your cap recruits. So you probably want to up this a bit so you get a fair number of your cap recruits. Like, stacking up fear is really good. You don't have access to a lot of the other thing. Like, you can do frighten spam and stuff with your mages, but I don't think you have access to, like, the, you know, wailing winds or anything like that to really stack up the fear. But I think this would be a totally viable build of just taking like anything with high death. You could do like one of the liches, you could do the Raven of the Underworld, you know, take fear and just start running around with a ton of sacreds, spooking everything away. The problem with this build is you run into something like, you know, berserkers, and it's going to struggle. I mean, you go dormant, you go in prison too. There's a bunch of things. I think if you're going to take a bless like this, an incarnate bless, you want to be really careful going imprisoned with an incarnate, because the risky part for Satis isn't the late game, I don't think. I think your risky part's the early and mid game. So I think dormant's fine in time for your first war, but awake, especially for something like fear, which is going to help you expand, it's probably worth like sacking some design points. So, you know, something like this could be a very viable build. You're going to get a lot of cap sacreds out. They're going to have fear on them. It was a pretty cheap bless to pick up. You've got really good scales. This could be very viable. Looking at more blesses, the nature blesses have not changed much. The glamour blesses, you could do a cheap dread. Luck doesn't work on undead, so that's probably not for us. All probably not for us. Displacement is basically going to be reducing the attack skill. On things like our sacreds, we don't really care because they've got really low defense. That's going to be a bit of a waste. Heroism can be interesting. I don't think that's for us in this particular nation. Maybe it is. It's a cheap way to get stats. I think it works on non-mindless things, so I think it would work on our tomb worms. So that could be a pickup, especially like for a few budget points maybe. Vampiric weapons, the question is, I don't think this works on... Yeah, no. I mean, this could work. It would be a way to heal up your guys, right, in combat. But I don't love it. It's really expensive too. I would rather have Blood Vengeance, Reforming Flesh, I think, than Vampiric weapons. But I'm sure somebody will figure out a cool build for it. To me, it just seems overpriced right now. The tricky thing about it is you have to hit them, but you can't kill them. Because if you kill them, there's not going to be any hit points left for the armor negating damage to hit on, right? So you have to like hit them, but not kill them. You have to not only hit them, but you have to do damage for this to proc. It's a lot of conditions. And when you end up factoring out the fact they can't die, they have to be hit, but they also have to do damage, there's a lot of ways it doesn't end up proccing that much. I don't think this is the thing. There's a lot of other cool blesses. We'll probably do a video where we go through all the new blesses. Like Enchanted Blood's really cool. You get a bit of MR, a bit of HP regen, and it also stops profuse bleeding. Profuse bleeding doesn't matter for us much, but the regen's kind of cool. And the MR is certainly nice. So, yeah, there's a bunch of things to consider. But that is I think there's a lot of different ways you could play them in Dominions. I think in Dominions 5, they're very hard to play well. And I think the build that I came up with and that I showed you was probably by far and away, in my opinion, the best way to play them in Dominions 5. It's the best way I've heard of to play them. And it was really cool. It was a really fun game. I hope I show you some of it. In Dominion 6, I think it's wide open. You can play these guys like a Scales Nation. You don't have to worry about a bless at all, right? You could just take like Unaging, so your Sarumancers are a little better. And just make Long Dead and Tomb Chariots. You know, you don't have to make any of the worms, right? So you don't need to worry about a bless at all. And the nation has good enough troops, you should be able to survive. You could also play it super bless focused, like I was saying, like basically lean into it. The thing that I think is going to be tricky is getting, and this I should actually have tried to do with you guys, is show like what would happen if we wanted to do the same thing where we really put the entire weight of the nation on our god. And I think the thing we'll find is you can't really afford it because we can't dump points in the same way we could previously, right? Like, we don't really have the points to go high in astral. We could pick up air so you can magic phase, right? But we're not, we have to be blood 8. Like, we've already dumpstered our scales. I think we're at 4 Dominion in the other thing. Oh, we don't have to be as high in nature. So let's just see if we can do this here. Blood Vengeance, Unaging, Reforming Flesh. And we have 1 point left over. Okay, but I mean, we've made it. Do 5 here. 2 points. Okay, 6 Dominion. So you could probably get, I don't know if this is good enough scales to get 6 Sacreds out, or 5 Sacreds out a turn. But also in 6, you need at least 2 holy points just to do Keeper of the Tombs twice a turn. So you're really only talking about 4 Sacreds a turn out of your cap with this. And then you get to pick up some other thing. right? But this is now a magic phase capable. I don't think you'll be able to do our cool fate weaving synergy in Dominion 6 the same way you could in 5. Just you don't have enough bless points to spend. You just can't afford it. You can't dump your scales as much. You're getting fewer bless points from every path you get. It just isn't going to happen. Now, what would we do? We have, what, 2 points left? What would we get? We could get awareness, shock resistance. We'd probably get shock resistance. Or you could get strength. I think these are both. Oh, if we've got reforming flesh, you actually probably want to pick up this. You'll want to get 2 tokens of HP. That's going to be really nice for your mages who are going to get more HP. But it's going to also bump your tomb worms up from 39 hit points to 41. So they'll get 1 more regen a turn. So I think that's probably what I'd do. It's going to be nice for your mages. So this probably, if you want to like play along in Dominion 6 with the build that I've got in Dominions 5, if I do put that series up, this is about as close as you'd be able to get to it. Now, you're going to be missing out on some late game stuff with really high astral, but yeah, it's a different game. You can't have it all. So, hope you guys have enjoyed, and we'll see you guys later. Cheers.